The storm that had been gathering all day finally broke across the prairie, with a low growl of thunder, rattling the shutters of the Avery ranch house and pushing dust across the wide, cracked fields like ghosts trying to find rest. And Thomas Avery, the rancher who had buried more years in solitude than he cared to count, leaned on the porch rail with his hat pulled low, watching the world drown in a blur of rain and knowing deep in his gut that trouble was rolling in with it, for trouble always came with the storm, and he was right, because by the time the sky split wide with lightning he saw her, a lone figure stumbling across the mud-soaked road, her dress clinging to her like a second skin, her steps uneven, her face hidden beneath a hood too heavy with water, and when she collapsed at the edge of his yard, he dropped his cigar, cursing, and ran to her side, hauling her limp weight up into his arms, feeling how light she was, how feverish her skin, burned, like she had been running not just from weather but from something darker, something crueler, and he carried her inside, laid her on the old couch, her lips trembling words that barely made sense until finally, as he leaned close enough to catch them, she whispered, don't touch me. I'm not clean." And the way she said it made his chest tighten, because it wasn't shame in her voice but terror. Not the kind a woman feels about dirt or blood, but the kind that runs deeper, as if she believed something inside her was poison. And Thomas, hardened as he was, felt the weight of her fear like a stone on his back. And as the lightning flashed again through the cracked window, he noticed for the first time the rope's thin red marks around her wrists, welts around her ankles, the bruises too perfectly placed to be an accident. And when he reached to pull the blanket over her shivering body, his hand brushed her arm, and she flinched so violently it cut him to the core. Yet still she whispered, don't lift it, don't look," her words rattling like dry leaves. But Thomas was a man who had seen cattle torn apart by wolves, and friends buried after shootouts gone wrong, and nothing rattled him easy until finally, against his better judgment and because her trembling begged answers he needed to know, he lifted the edge of her dress just enough to see what she was hiding. And when the cloth pulled back and the light revealed what lay beneath, Thomas Avery, the man who had never bowed to storm nor outlaw or death, froze where he sat, his breath caught, his heart hammering against the cage of his chest, because what he saw was not just wounds or scars, but something no man living on the plains was prepared to understand, something that whispered of cruelty deeper than hunger, punishment sharper than the law, and secrets that could kill faster than a bullet. And in that breathless silence, as rain hammered the roof and the world outside blurred, Thomas realized he hadn't just pulled a stranger from the storm, he had invited a curse into his home, a curse wrapped in flesh and sorrow, and whether he wanted it or not, his life would never be the same. Thomas Avery had seen death before. He had seen the broken bodies of men after a range war, seen the sunburnt corpses of those who'd wandered too far from water, even seen a mother clutching her child when sickness took them both in one breath. But nothing he had seen in all his hard, weather-beaten years prepared him for what lay beneath that young woman's dress, because carved into her skin were symbols burned in deep, scarred over as if pressed there by hot iron brands, marks no rancher used on cattle and no sheriff would ever sanction, twisting shapes that seemed older than the desert itself, like words written in a language made of suffering, and they crawled across her thighs and belly in cruel spirals, seared into flesh so tender he could almost smell the char still clinging to her. And when she saw him staring, she jerked the fabric down and clutched it with both hands, eyes wild, voice cracking like a whip as she sobbed, "I told you not to look. I told you I'm not clean. Now it will know you too." And the fear in her words rooted him to the chair, because this wasn't the fear of a woman shamed. It was the fear of someone carrying a secret so heavy it crushed her soul. And Thomas, though his hands shook, forced himself steady, saying, in that low drawl that had broken wild horses and soothed dying men, "Easy now, girl. Ain't nothing on this earth that makes you unclean in my eyes, just pain, and I've carried my share." But she only shook her head, tears streaking her dirt-caked cheeks, whispering, "You don't understand. I wasn't meant to make it out. They made me bait, and if I don't go back, they'll come for everyone." And Thomas felt that cold knot twist in his gut, because he knew the West was cruel. But this was a cruelty worse than bullets or knives. This was cruelty with purpose. And before he could press her further, the storm outside cracked like judgment, a flash of lightning throwing his shadow tall against the wall as if warning him that the darkness was already at his door. And he knew in that moment that this woman hadn't just stumbled into his home by chance. She had been sent, marked, branded with something beyond the law, and now he was tangled in it, whether he liked it or not. So he poured her water, pressed a quilt into her hands, and sat across from her, watching as her lips trembled prayers she didn't finish. And as the wind howled through the cracks, Thomas swore beneath his breath that whatever curse she thought she carried, whatever devils had carved their story into her skin, he wasn't about to let her face them alone. Not while he still drew breath, but even as the vow left his chest, the sound of hooves in the distance broke through the storm, slow and steady. The kind of sound that didn't come from neighbors, but from men who rode with purpose. And her eyes shot wide with dread, her hands clutching his sleeve as she whispered, through chattering teeth, "It's them. They've already found me." And Thomas, the storm raging outside and another one building in his chest, reached for the rifle on the wall. Because if death was coming to his door, then by God it was about to find him waiting. The storm outside hadn't broken yet. It only gathered itself into a rage that seemed to mirror the storm inside Thomas's chest. And as the sound of hooves drew closer, slow and deliberate like wolves circling a dying steer, he stood with the rifle in his grip and his jaw set hard. Every inch of him the weathered rancher who'd buried his kin, fought rustlers, and lived long enough to know when danger came calling. But even still his heart hammered in a way it hadn't since he was a boy, because the woman on his couch was staring at the door like death itself was about to walk through it. Her lips moving in half-formed words, "Don't let them in. Please God, don't let them in." And Thomas knew from the way she shook that these weren't ordinary men outside. They were something worse, men bound to the same cruelty that had carved her flesh. And as the first knock came, a slow, deliberate thud that rattled the boards, Thomas didn't move, just leveled his rifle and called out, "Storm's too mean for visitors tonight. Best ride on." But the reply came smooth and chilling. "We ain't visitors, rancher, we're taken back what's ours." And at that, the girl let out a broken sob that clawed at his ribs, whispering, "I told you, I'm not clean, I'm theirs." And Thomas, for all his grit, felt the weight of choice press down on him heavier than the storm, because he could hand her over and send them on their way, or stand and fight for a woman who claimed herself cursed. But his blood boiled at the thought of giving her back to devils in boots. So he spat on the floor, cocked the rifle, and growled, "Only thing you'll take from my land is lead." And the silence that followed was worse than noise, because it meant they were smiling in the dark. Men who expected him to break but didn't know Thomas Avery, didn't know that a man who'd lost everything had nothing left to fear. And when the door finally burst inward on the crack of thunder, shadows spilling across his floor, Thomas fired, the blast echoing like judgment through the storm, the smell of gunpowder and rain mixing as chaos erupted. And through it all, he caught glimpses of faces twisted not just with cruelty, but something unholy. Eyes too bright, too hungry, and the girl's scream rose above it all, "Don't let them touch you." But it was too late. One hand, cold and strong as iron, brushed his arm, and fire shot through his veins, a poison that made his vision blur. And for a heartbeat he saw it. The truth, the same brands crawling like living snakes across their skin, marks that fed not on flesh but on souls. And he knew then what they wanted wasn't just the girl, it was him too. Him and anyone fool enough to stand in their way. And as he stumbled back, fighting the sickness in his blood, he realized the storm outside was nothing compared to the one he'd just let inside his home. A storm that would not stop until it consumed them all. The cabin had turned into a battlefield, the thunder outside clashing with the thunder of rifle shots, the smell of gunpowder choking the air while the storm rattled every nail in the walls. And Thomas Avery, though his veins burned like wildfire from the cursed touch of the riders, stood like a wall of stone, firing, swinging, fighting like a man who had nothing left to lose but the stubbornness to give up. And the girl on the couch, her name, he finally caught in the chaos, was Sarah. Screamed for him to run, to leave her. But his boots rooted themselves deeper into the blood-soaked floor, because running was never in his nature, not when another soul leaned on him to stand. And as one rider fell with a shotgun blast to the chest and rose again,